Hello and welcome to the Ranching Returns podcast, where we believe that when done right, your return on ranching can be far more than just extreme profitability, but a return to your land resource as well as a priceless lifestyle. Hey folks, and welcome back to the Ranching Returns podcast, sponsored by Faro Cattle Company, which I am actually recording this introduction from my hotel room, the Highland House here in Springview, Nebraska, because tomorrow morning starts the bull evaluation days for the Nebraska bull sale. So I'll be here for the next day running through all the bulls here in Nebraska. Looking forward to seeing them, and hopefully some of you guys are coming up to the evaluation day as well. Obviously, by the time this is released, you'll have already made that decision. But if not, at the evaluation days, hopefully we'll see you at a sale this fall. Today's episode is with Eric Bailey, and I've had him on a couple times in past for different episodes that have been very popular and really interesting conversations. Today we're talking about essentially, there's a lot of marketing out there, and how do you define or decide what inputs are worth the investment on your ranch and what is just a lot of marketing hype. So I think a very valuable conversation. We'll dive into things like salt and mineral programs, apple cider vinegar, creep feed, and all the good stuff. So hope that you enjoy it. I think we'll keep this one short and dive right into the episode. I hope that you enjoyed this episode with Eric Bailey. Well, Eric, thanks so much for joining me, and welcome back to the Ranching Returns podcast.
Jared, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. You've been on a couple times and I should recommend those to folks too. It's episode 178 and episode 195, both back in 2024. And they were fantastic conversations. They were popular episodes. The first one on kind of a project you did around doubling down on stockers and double stocking stockers for half the time versus a half rate of stockers for an entire grazing season. And the second one was on your philosophies around heifer development. Really good conversations. People should check those out if they haven't already. But we were kind of discussing around the idea of another topic here that I thought would be really valuable to the listeners. It's a question I have for myself a lot. And it's that idea of essentially you pick up a magazine. Nowadays, you scroll through social media. A lot of these ag companies are pushing ads to you everywhere. There's value out there everywhere, I guess you could say. Buy this and add X amount of pounds to your weaning weight. Buy this and increase your breeding by this much or whatever. And how do you essentially determine what of those things out there are actually worth the investment, I guess, is kind of the discussion we're going to take. And I'll kick it over to you to start, see wherever you want to take it from there. But yeah.
Well, Jared, this is a topic that I feel sort of uniquely qualified to take on because in my day job, I'm a beef cattle extension specialist at the University of Missouri, and my training is in beef cattle nutrition specifically. Okay. And so, feed costs are 60 to 70% of beef cattle production, irrespective of the segment, right? Cow-calf on pasture and hay, backgrounding stocker operations, feed yards, et cetera. And so, the decisions that we make around nutrition oftentimes can have an outsized impact on the bottom line. And, from my perspective, I generally try to promote for the majority of producers who are selling into the commodity markets that your best lever is to control your costs, right? Because if you're selling into the commodity market, you're not setting the price, you're taking the price that's determined at auction or elsewhere. And so if you don't have a lot of control over the price that you get for your cattle, for your calves, et cetera, then your best way to manage profit is to control costs. And so, we also see a lot of stuff out there that gets marketed as, I sent you that advertisement over the weekend when we were chatting about this for a product that promised reduced hay use, improved average daily gain, improved conception rate. It had quite the long list of... It
was the silver bullet, it looks like, for ranchers. If you want to be profitable, apparently all you need is this tub.
Exactly. And it was a pretty egregious example of, I don't know that we could back up what they're claiming when you really looked hard at this. And especially, like a person in my position, I have to be pretty strict with things I endorse, talk about, I wouldn't necessarily say promote because I work for a university, obviously, but, I think when I sometimes I sort of get a reputation of being Dr. No amongst
Yeah,
producers in Missouri because they'll
sure.
call and have seen something along these lines, and they're looking for me to maybe validate the claims, and 95% of the time I question the strength of the evidence that is provided, or maybe how far that
Mhm.
this could go. And it's, in some ways it's kind of sad because nutrition's been studied since the 18th century. I mean, it's an old discipline. It's been around a
Right.
long time, but there's still a lot of misinformation out there, and there's still a lot of things that we're clearing up for producers today that are really kind of foundational, at least from my perspective. Now, I've been studying it since 2008, so
Hmm.
I I've been in academia for 18 years now, whether as a student or now as a professor. So I've
Yeah.
probably got a little bit of bias from that perspective, but
Right.
it's kind of fascinating to me. It never ceases to amaze me what I hear and
Yeah.
what gets claimed out there. So
Right, right. And how much, I mean, maybe some of these things do have some backing to them when it's claims around weight gains and stuff, but is it still at a profitable level? Like, I mean, when people come to you, how many times are people asking about, is this a profitable decision versus is this a productive decision? Will this increase my
that is an
productivity?
excellent framing, productive versus profitable.
Yeah.
Because there's certainly times where, and even going back to the heifer development conversation that we had in 2024, my whole thesis around heifer development is that we should only invest in heifers that can demonstrate their ability to perform in your management system, not
Right.
let's invest all the resources in a handful of heifers and maximize their probability of getting pregnant
Mhm.
and then turn them out in the back 40 and treat them like any old mature cow, right? Those
Mhm.
that's not a good recipe for longevity. And even those that fail to become pregnant, then because you've developed them at a high cost of gain, higher than what the market will bear, you're going to lose money on the ones that you sell. And that's so it's a value proposition, and this is the same deal, right? I mean, you can
Mhm.
spend a tremendous amount of money chasing a 5 percentage unit increase in conception rate.
Yeah.
If that's going from 50 to 55, it's probably profitable for you to do it. If that's going from 90 to 95, it may not be profitable at that point, depending on how much you have to spend in it.
Yeah.
And I like I said, I get kind of a reputation for being too skeptical at times, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
it's tough.
and I think I do as well because, and I've tried to push myself on this a little bit and stuff too, specifically in our context as being seed stock producers trying to produce low input cattle that can thrive with minimal input. I in some ways see it as our job to maybe push the limits on what is too far. And I'll often tell people, what makes sense for us may not make sense in a commercial setting, and maybe you are better off doing some things. So how does that person really find where is the limit of, you're moving from making a good business decision to you're trying to starve a profit into a cow, or you're trying to cut too much and it's going to hurt your bottom line and you'd be better off putting a few more bucks into it.
Well, there's a whole cottage industry of consultants that have built up in this space, and I'm just going to shout out the OGs in it, ranching
Yeah.
for profit, right?
Yeah.
If you don't
Right.
know your numbers to
Right.
begin with, I don't know. It's very difficult to make a determination whether
Mm-hmm.
that change in practice is
Right.
going to be profitable for your farm or not, right?
Yeah.
And that's I still struggle with that. I interact with a lot of operations in my job that I think could benefit tremendously from simply knowing their costs, knowing what the value of their inventory is, just knowing their numbers, having more
Right.
financial literacy, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where people will get caught up in the production at times if you don't know your numbers. But man, I know it'll make my numbers look better if I,
Right. Yeah.
if I get an extra tenth of a day average daily gain, or
Yeah.
my weaning weight on my calves is, 20 pounds heavier. Right. So let's dive into a specific example
Sure.
right now. So
Yeah.
I hate creep feeding. I hate it. I will go so far as to say that right off the bat.
Yeah.
And people look at me funny sometimes, but there's actually if you look at the body of evidence for creep feeding, one of the claims that people make right away is that it spares body condition score on a cow. And there was a really nice study done at Illinois about 30 years ago where they measured milk production in the cows with calves that either were offered or were not offered creep. They measured the milk consumption of those calves, how much forage those calves ate. And guess what is the only thing that went down when calves were offered creep from like the last 84 days before weaning?
Forage consumed by the calf?
Forage consumed. Yeah. Milk production did not change. Milk consumption did not change.
Yeah.
So a calf gets creep, milk, and forage, and forage was the only one that went down in that case. And so it was a fairly large data set. There was no impact on cow body condition scores. So when people make that claim right off the bat, I know that it's not going to benefit the cow, even though that's a testimonial, that's folklore, that's an anecdote, that gets repeated pretty widely.
Yeah. Can I ask if you got more on that before you leave? I have a question for you, but carry on with the.
No, go for it. Go for it. I'll get back to it.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I've always felt that way too. And on the creep feeding thing, I remember specifically at a co-op sponsored event for cow-calf producers we went to, they handed out a sheet talking about how X amount of, feed this creep feed and you'll gain pounds by this. And then they used the weight from the local sale barn or whatever and showed how it pays for itself. But the extra 100 pounds or whatever, they didn't show any price slide. Like that extra 100 pounds weren't worth any less per pound like they typically are. And when I ran the math using the local co-op's price slide based on that increased weight, it was break even at best. And it's like kind of poor marketing. But so I tend to agree with you. My question revolves around, and this is the one I don't have an answer. I've just been curious and thinking on this. And in a cow-calf production system where we kind of focus on less milk because milk is such a inefficient, you got to feed a lot of feed through a cow to produce milk to feed a calf. It's an inefficient calorie exchange. When you have cows that aren't milking to the calf's potential, would you be better off creep feeding a calf at that point to give it the additional nutrients it could get and get a few, like, would it be more beneficial in that scenario versus a high milking cow system? And I'm just curious. If a neighbor came to you tomorrow and offered you the opportunity to lease their land and run their cattle, do you feel confident enough in your business to know whether or not you can take that opportunity on and be profitable at it? I know for myself and so many people, you may not have that kind of confidence. And if that's you, it might be worth adding someone to your team to do it. John Haskell and his team at Ranch Right LLC can take on the bookwork for your business. They can break out your income and expenses by enterprise and know what enterprises in your business are making you money and which enterprises are losing you money, so that the next time an opportunity comes your way, you can take action with decisiveness and confidence, knowing the numbers of your business support that decision. Again, if that's something you're interested in, you can reach out to John and his team at ranchrightllc.com.
I think that's a really good question. And I'm going to go back and address your value of gain, because that was going to be the second part of what I wanted to follow up with. Sure. You're completely right. There's a cost side to the feed itself, but then there's also a value of gain component. Right. And, I think a lot of people would be shocked if they were to go run value of gains on their spring-born calves, how little money they make taking a 400-pound calf to 500 to 600 pounds.
Right.
And I think at times, not always, but at times and in certain areas, selling a 400-pound calf in August prior to a steep seasonal decline in prices, you might actually end up with an extra body condition score on your cows going into winter. Mm-hmm. You might end up with lower feed costs because of that. And honestly, not all that much difference in revenue. Yeah, from selling the 400-pound calf versus the 500 or 600-pound calf later on. I think that's areas of the country where winter feed costs are high. That's a really interesting piece. But that value of gain, it's a good point. I start running those numbers now if I've got spring calving cows, and I'm making my weaning decisions based upon what the market's kind of telling me is going to happen, rather than trying to maximize weaning weight. Now, that's from a commercial context, right? I'm not reporting numbers to a breed association or using that as part of a marketing, in a seed stock context. But I think you bring up an excellent point. And so know your costs, number one. Value of gain on your growing animals is absolutely the second part of that.
Yeah. Good point.
So I'm going to go back to the cost side of this again. So I mentioned that, creep feeding didn't benefit a cow, but there's also, companies that are trying to value add. They're trying to upsell a branded creep feed product that'll be at times $400 a ton plus, right? 20 cents a pound.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, so if it takes 5 pounds of creep feed to put an extra pound of weight on a calf and it costs 20 cents a pound, that's $1, right? Pretty straightforward math.
Right.
That value proposition, at least in the current market context, probably makes some sense because I see value of gains in the stocker backgrounder phase right now that are $2 plus, right? Yeah. Specifically in lighter weight cattle. That makes sense. But what was my assumption there? 5-to-1 conversion rate. I very commonly see, and there's data in the literature that would say that the creep feed conversion rate should actually be more like 8 to 10 pounds of feed per pound of gain. And so if your creep conversion ratio is 10 pounds and your creep costs 20 cents a pound, that's $2 per pound of weight gained. And so, going back to answer your question, I know I kind of went in a roundabout way to get there, but your supplement conversion ratio has an extremely large impact on whether that actually is beneficial to your animals. Now, again, seed stock context, weaning weights get reported to breed associations. They're used as part of the marketing of the animals that you're trying to sell, the breeding stock. It probably does, but you're also in a value-added context and environment. The context is so dependent in a situation like this. And I can see situations where creep feeding could convert at 5-to-1. But if you look at the body of evidence that's in the research literature, eight's a number that I'm way more comfortable using, and there are times that it'll be reported to be 10 plus.
Really?
So that's that makes the numbers really tough to pencil, particularly with, like I said, the value-added creeps that are kind of branded products. Now, blends of commodity feeds that are, not necessarily upsold, I think there's maybe some opportunity there, right? So the cost of your feed, the conversion ratio, the pounds of feed per pound of additional weight gain, the value of gain, those are kind of the big three factors when you have to evaluate whether, creep feeding is going to make some sense for your operation or not. And I think this is the perfect time to be having this conversation because, creep feeding in a spring calving context usually occurs within the last 60 to 90 days before weaning. So we're right smack dab in the middle of that right now.
Right. No, that makes sense. It's one of those, I suppose for a lot of folks, that cost gets buried in with all the other costs of keeping a cow for a year, and nobody really knows how much costs specifically in those extra pounds. Like, it's really hard to record and be able to say those pounds added by the creep feed cost this and the value is this and it made or did not make sense. So they just do it because they can see clearly there's a increase in production, and it's kind of just buried in all the numbers and hard to really parse out as far as
and it's tough to do, right? Because you're not gonna creep feed one set of calves on your farm or ranch and then not creep feed another set. Maybe some of the bigger operations might, but I mean, particularly in a smaller operation, you're probably not going to. And so then what ends up happening is the ranch or farm might say, well, I'll creep feed this year and then not creep feed next year and look at the difference in my weaning weights. But there's so many other factors that play into the weaning weights. We call that confounding in the research area, right? There's so many other factors that are confounded that it doesn't fully explain it. And so, that's a tough number for the average operation to really kind of wrap their arms around. And so then they have to either trust the people that they're buying the creep from or trust the experts. And I'm making quotation marks in the air for those of you that are listening on Spotify or on the radio otherwise, the experts as in myself, right? And that's where a lot of times you sort of get this kind of push-pull, and it's like, who do I trust, right? Because, again, Dr. No, who says no to everything, or, the feed salesman who's promoting it.
It's too bad that, we're kind of at a disadvantage to row crop producers who can do strip tests down the middle of a field or whatever and so easily test. I mean, you see people planting X amount of different varieties of corn and doing however many different trials on one field. So they know you're not even comparing field to field. It's right next to each other. You can do these side-by-side tests where it's so much more difficult in a cow-calf scenario to really be able to do that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and I had never thought of that before, but that makes perfect sense. You're right. We don't get that same opportunity to really sort of test these things on our operation to discern whether or not they work.
Yeah, because like I look at our farm, we've got 8 different pastures spread 30 miles apart, and every one of them you can noticeably see every year calves coming in are different weights. Like certain pastures have more shade trees and those calves do better. Like a lot of our pastures don't have any shade, they have more heat stress, and another one has poorer grass. And they, like, for us to say we'll test something at these different farms or different trials, there's so many other factors, like you're saying. We just couldn't get an
even doing
test.
Like if you had, let's talk about the one group that a farm or ranch might sort off even on a smaller scale, first calf heifers. Is that really a fair comparison to creep feed first calf heifers, calves off of first calf heifers, and then compare that to mature cows, right? That's an absolutely an opportunity to bias your experiment there, right? Because we know they're going to milk less. They're trying to grow still. We know that first calf heifer calves wean light. That's just a fact of the game. So now on the other side, if you do it the other way, it could bias it to make it look good. So so that's one I struggle with a lot, even though it's a common practice. But I will say there are contexts where it makes sense, and there are people that do it, and I help people put creep feeding rations together, and and there's also people who know their numbers well enough that, or maybe they're raising a lot of the commodities that are going into the creep feeder, right? And they're selling it at cost of production, not buying it, and so.
Nope, that makes sense. It's one of those things you got to know. The value of knowing your numbers is worth a lot because, otherwise you can very blindly stumble into a lot of those marketing traps and just assume that it's improving your bottom line, and it might actually be moving you the opposite direction. So good point. So creep feed is one. Is there any more on that or any other examples of things that, I guess mineral is something we've talked a lot about?
Oh gosh. Yeah.
And that's
mineral.
one that I just find myself so ignorant is probably the best word. Like, I just don't know what the right stuff is. I have no idea. There are people talking on all sides of what the right way around salt and mineral programs. So,
and that's one place where the opportunity to be upsold on a product or type of products or et cetera, that discourse has I wouldn't say gotten out of hand, but it's just substantial, right? So the claims that are made at times for this product can help you with this, improve conception rates by 10% or something like that, right? It's pretty tough to back that up with a solid body of research evidence that would support it. And it just kind of, even the way that you deliver mineral, right? So there's like the complete mineral supplements that are put out loose or in block form, or adding it to a supplement like a lick tub, or hand mixing it into a feed that you're feeding, or even like the cafeteria style mineral feeders, right? Where they're the nutritional
individual
wisdom.
Stuff.
There's a ton of different ways that it could be provided. And that's just one place where if you start to look at the literature very closely, man, it just makes you never want to dive too deep into this. So, one of the things that we measure in research is something called a coefficient of variation. So imagine you've got 2 animals, and I'm not going to tell you what the animals are yet, but imagine that one of them will vary by 1 pound. The other one varies by 10 pounds. Okay. On the surface, it sounds like the one that weighs 10 pounds has a lot more variation associated with it. But what if I told you I was comparing a chicken and a cow? So a chicken that weighs 4 pounds, but varies by 1 pound on either side, 3 to 5 pounds, has a larger coefficient of variation than a cow that weighs 1,000 pounds and varies by 10 pounds in either direction. Right. So the coefficient of variation, there's 2 coefficient of variations in mineral intake that never get talked about. that are dramatically larger than what I think anybody, feed companies, myself for that matter, want to recognize. So in a self-fed mineral supplement, the coefficient of variation around how much the average cow in a herd will eat of that supplement over the course of the feeding period is in excess of 50%. And at times has been measured as high as 80%, meaning that if you put out a 4-ounce mineral, right, so quarter-pound intake per head per day, you'll see at a minimum cows that will eat over the period that you're testing it. Some that'll eat 2 ounces a day, some that'll eat 6 ounces a day. Right. And so now there's the question whether or not those cows were truly eating that much mineral because they needed to, I think is a highly reasonable question to answer or ask at least. But on the other hand, is the animal that's eating 2 ounces of mineral a day getting enough? Right. And then you look at supplement intake on a day-to-day basis. Supplement intake on a day-to-day mineral supplement on a day-to-day basis for a single cow will vary at times over 100%. Meaning that if it's a 4-ounce mineral, there will be days where she'll eat 8 ounces and there are days where she'll eat 0 ounces. Right. And so then that's where a lot of my skepticism, particularly around the really high dollar mineral supplements that's where I get pretty skeptical because there's just so much variation in intake and there's so little evidence to suggest that improving the consistency of that intake is going to materially benefit the productivity of that animal. Right. And honestly, that's the primary reason that, particularly when we get into some of these products. So products that are intended to improve like fly control over the summer. Now, I would say that the fly control products, the IGRs, I mean, there's pretty good body of evidence that they're effective, but when we get into some of the more natural versions, like, adding garlic, things like that, right? Or even, adding spices or flavorings like capsicum to improve vasodilation and maybe reduce heat stress or fescue toxicosis, right? When you have that much variation in intake, it's hard to demonstrate consistent efficacy across these products. So not a lot of people talk about that though. They want to talk about the level of vitamin A in their supplement or the level of copper or the level of selenium. Well, selenium's tightly regulated by the FDA, the inclusion rate. So that's probably not the one, but vitamin A and copper are usually the two that people want to talk about. And, feed companies will market against each other. Well, this company's got 160,000 IUs per pound of vitamin A, so I'm going to put 200,000 IUs vitamin A per pound and then market that I've got more. Right. Irrespective of the fact that the cow's vitamin A requirement might be somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000 IUs per day, right? So So there's just a lot of stuff around that. Now, sadly, as an extension specialist, I would tell you that I get 7, 8 out of 10 questions I get in my office, calls, emails, etc., are about mineral supplements, and I struggle with that a lot because I spend a lot more time trying to encourage people to think about, energy, protein, feed intake in general, just the big rocks, right? Yeah. That's what I focus on a lot as a nutritionist, not really trying to dial in the really fine tooth stuff at the top, Yeah.
So is there a need for mineral then? I mean, like if you're saying
that is an absolutely fair question. And that is something that I've asked a question over time. And so here's how I frame it. I say yes. I say yes. I can sound, like I said, I can sound very skeptical, but how I frame mineral supplementation is as an insurance policy, not as a performance booster or a silver bullet. Sure. Okay. Right. And so, I'm very interested in having an insurance policy of micronutrients on my operation to provide protection against clinical deficiencies. And certainly there are parts of the country where, the soil concentrations of these minerals and vitamins or these minerals are big determinants of what the forage that the cows consume are going to have in terms of that content. And, Selenium deficiency is pretty widespread in various parts of the country, right? We know
Yeah.
that selenium is an important one. We know that copper is an important one. Also, copper gets bound by iron and molybdenum and other minerals. And so we also know that there's areas of the country where either copper's low or iron is high or molybdenum is high, right? And so then you don't end up with much copper that's truly available to the animal. So yes, I am firmly in the camp that mineral supplements are necessary, but I look at them again like an insurance policy, right? And I look at the animals that I'm feeding them to, right? And I liken it to car insurance a lot of times. Okay. So if I drive an '06 Silverado, 228,000 miles. It's been paid for 10 years.
Good work. Yeah.
I
Pretty similar to
love
my
that
truck,
pickup.
except to Ford. Yeah. Yeah.
But why would I carry full coverage insurance with a $0 deductible on that pickup at that point, right? The salvage value of it at this point is what, $5,000 maybe?
Yeah,
I'm
maybe.
just kind of ballparking. I don't have any idea really what it is.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, if I'm driving around in a 2026, Silverado 3500 Denali, blah, 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 that costs 90 some $1,000.
Yeah.
I might want to carry a little bit more automobile insurance coverage on it. I might be willing to pay more for something like that. And so that's kind of how I think about it. Now, I'm not trying to say that people are raising jalopy cows out there or anything, but I just think the context matters. If you are raising commercial cows and your mineral program costs $200 a cow a year, which I have seen, I actually have seen that.
Yeah.
That's probably a sign that things are out of whack. And I can actually pretty simply explain why that happens. The thing that's kind of interesting about minerals, go look at your mineral tags. I guarantee you most commercial supplements, either the number 3 or the number 4 ingredient on the tag is going to say plant byproducts, grain byproducts, processed byproducts.
Got a picture of it, so I'm just looking at mine. But mine's a little different kind, so it might not.
Yeah.
It's from the Holistic Life Supply.
Gotcha.
What's his name? Dr. Will Winters, I think, kind of made it. So it might be a little different. I don't know. But let's see. Ingredients: monocalcium phosphate, dehydrated seaweed meal, magnesium, mica, sodium bentonite, magnesium. It doesn't have, looks like, other stuff.
So that's actually a good sign. So a lot of the commercial formulations that you'll see, the reason that they put, like I said, it's either grain byproduct, plant byproduct.
Yeah.
That is essentially like wheat middlings or soy hulls or rice hulls or distillers grains. And so one of the questions that I ask and I never get a good answer on is, are the cows eating this mineral because of the specific copper, zinc, selenium, manganese, etc., or are they eating it to try and get a few calories or to get some protein, right?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how the when you put a mineral formulation into like a pressed lick tub, that's kind of the goal, right? You're trying to entice them with some protein and energy, and then they're also consuming some mineral with it. And so when I formulate mineral supplements, limestone and salt are my bases. Those are my biggest inclusions. I don't put any plant byproducts or distillers grain, soy hulls, wheat mids, rice hulls, any of that as a bulking agent, right? And it's funny if you look at a formulation, right, on a per ton basis, and I've actually got one right here. So like my limestone inclusion's 800 pounds, my salt is 670 pounds. My dical phosphate's 200 pounds, right? So I've got 3 ingredients that are taking up 80% of the formulation. So like magnesium, vitamin A, D, and E, selenium, zinc, copper, iodine, those take up less than 20% of the formulation.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they have to put these bulking agents, but I chose to use limestone as my bulking agent versus using something that might entice the animals to, overconsume them. I would say that a lot of times when I get the grumpy phone call from the producer about complaining about mineral cost, they complain about a per bag cost, but they're really complaining about a per cow per year cost.
Yeah.
And a lot of times if they know their numbers, or if they allow me to kind of work through the numbers with them, I can demonstrate that their cows are eating way more mineral than what the bag says.
Mm-hmm.
A 4-ounce mineral, so that means that the tag says that a cow should eat 4 ounces of it per head per day. A quarter pound times 365 days, that's 91.25 pounds of mineral. So a cow should eat about 2 bags of mineral a year.
Okay.
I'm rounding up, right? Because
Sure.
most bags are 50 pounds, and
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say that it should be 1.875 bags or anything like that. But a general operation, if cow eats 2 bags of mineral a year, that's about right. I've seen operations that have cows that'll eat 4 bags pretty commonly.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen operations where cows will eat 6, 7, 8 bags of mineral per cow per year.
Wow.
When we really dive into their numbers. And so their complaint is about the cost per bag, but their real issue is the cost per cow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
this episode is brought to you by Redmond Agriculture. If you're like most ranchers, you've learned that the best solutions are often the simplest ones. Quality forage, adapted genetics, a good mineral program, and healthy soil are still the foundation of a profitable ranch. That's why ranchers across the country trust Redmond Agriculture. Redmond's natural sea and volcanic minerals help ranchers support healthier livestock and soil. Because at the end of the day, profitability isn't always about doing more. It's often about getting more from what you're already doing. Healthier herds getting more out of their forage means fewer headaches for you and your bottom line. No gimmicks, no complicated systems, just natural products rooted in the belief that when we work with nature, good things happen. Visit redmondagriculture.com to learn more. Redmond Agriculture, nature has it right. Well, I've also thought that what is largely considered, I consider an enticer, or I've heard people talk about that with salt, to get cows to consume more salt. What is that doing in a mineral mix? I mean, that's to sell more, to move more product is my thought around that, but maybe there's another purpose.
Salt is my enticer and my mineral. So my mineral supplements that I custom formulate, instead of having the other protein or energy as the enticer, cattle do have an appetite for salt, right? And so I'm looking at the guaranteed analysis on that formulation I have right here. My salt concentration is 35%. That's a lot higher than a lot of other formulations. Most of them are half that.
Sure.
Roughly 20. And so I'm using salt as the enticer because try biting into a piece of chalk, right? That's not going to be very enticing, right? Limestone.
Yeah. Right.
So there's got to be something in there to get them to voluntarily consume it, unless I'm mixing it into like a supplement of some kind that I'm hand feeding, or if I'm doing free choice, right? Lick tubs or liquid feed or something along those lines.
Yeah.
A lot of ways to skin that cat. But yeah, I use salt as my enticement. I think that's a great way to go about it.
Yeah.
I also think that's a good way if you've got cows that are eating the heck out of mineral, right? And you want to not. So my advice when cows are overeating mineral is that they're likely eating it for something else that's in the mineral, not for a specific nutrient.
Right. Yeah.
I'll tell people if you've got an overconsumption problem, to mix a bag of salt and a bag of mineral and put that out to try and slow the cows down. Because cows generally will eat about 0.1% of their body weight per day in salt. Like that's how people will sometimes make their own sort of homemade self-fed supplements, is that they'll mix whatever feed they want to mix with salt and then put it out for each choice. And the back of the envelope kind of rule of thumb that people use is 0.1% of their body weight per day. So, all right, a 1,500 pound cow might eat a pound and a half of salt a day. That would be the 0.1% of body weight.
Okay.
So
So I like your framing of the mineral as sort of an insurance policy. It's just essentially got a bunch of stuff that the cows may or may not be getting enough of out in your pastures, out in your context, and it's there available for them. If not, and if they're not consuming the 4 ounces or whatever people think they should, it's not something to freak out about necessarily if it's available to them. And go ahead.
A younger version of myself would say, hey, if your cows eat a pallet of mineral in a month, take the mineral away from them until it averages out. Now, the more risk-averse older version of myself would say just mix some salt with it. Just try to slow intake down with something
Sure.
else, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. How have you heard? I mean, there's people out there who are talking about just kind of going almost a straight salt or straight salt conditioner, clay or whatever, the diatomaceous earth kind of stuff like that, mixing that with salt and just, I don't know. Have you heard that kind of talk? And kind
yeah,
of you can make do without mineral. And I'm not sure if somebody will say specifically, you don't need mineral. I've never heard someone say you don't need mineral ever again or something like that necessarily. But what are your thoughts on that?
yeah. So I have seen, a lot of different programs for supplementing mineral over the years. And, a lot of times the diatomaceous earth is actually used as a binder to bind toxins or otherwise.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
right.
one that I think we could stand by. I mean, me, we could probably stand to do some more research on in a university setting to kind of understand a little bit better. Because there's some pretty powerful anecdotes out there that are, I wouldn't say that they're wrong, but we just don't have maybe, and I may just not be familiar with the replicated controlled experiments that have been published that have used it.
Most of what I've heard are anecdotes, and they are powerful anecdotes, but that's what they are. So
so that's one that I just right off the bat, I won't say yes or no to. I would say that we just don't have a strong body of evidence to support it. But the idea of so I'm gonna maybe get myself in a little bit of trouble here, but I have seen these types of value-added salts. I'm going to call them value-added salt products that will say that they have over 70 different minerals in them. Beef cattle have 7 requirements established for 17 minerals. Okay. It's not 70, 17.
Sure.
So I can't say that product would be superior because it's got a greater number of minerals in it than regular formulations, because many of those minerals we just simply don't have any evidence of a clinical deficiency level, like a level at which below the animals will show some sort of clinical deficiency, or a level above at which they'll show clinical symptoms of toxicity. Now, of course, we're trying to avoid the deficiency, right?
Right.
With the provision of the supplement, but that's one place where I see maybe some kind of upsold salt that I just don't know that we have the body of evidence to support that specific claim. Now, if there's an experiment out there that's replicated, done by a third party, believe me, I'll find it, or I'd love to see it. But, at that point, we can't do more than call that like a case study or an on-farm observation or a testimonial or an anecdote. And the strength of evidence for those is just maybe not quite there. And that actually is a great place. I wanted to share an infographic that I created using ChatGPT to sort of talk about this today. I think it's highly relevant. I'll describe it for those of y'all that are listening in on Spotify. If you happen to be watching this, I'm going to put it up here on the screen now. But essentially what it is it's a hierarchy of evidence. And so what it is a pyramid with 6 basically rows on it. Row number 1 is the bottom, testimonials, folklore, social media, right? And so that would be the lowest strength of evidence that we would have to support efficacy. Conference talks, expert opinion, trade articles would be next. Case studies, on-farm observations, anecdotes would be next above that. And then above that is where we get into like actual controlled research, right? And so there's observational research where we observe, groups of animals over time. Not necessarily going to be looking for cause and effect, but we're trying to see if there maybe is some kind of association. Then there's replicated controlled experiments, where that's the type of stuff that I do as part of my responsibilities at the University of Missouri, where we're randomly assigning cattle to pastures and we're doing multiple replications and we're feeding the same treatment to different groups of animals, right? And then we're comparing it to a different treatment or series of treatments. That's the type of stuff that we get published in journals and things along that line. And then the top of the hierarchy of evidence is actually essentially where we put journal articles together that are the combination of many studies to try and estimate the overall effect of a type of practice, right? So rather than one journal article studying the impact of, let's say, X mineral concentration, this is a journal article that summarizes 10 other journal articles that studied that. And so, as we went up that pyramid, the strength of evidence gets stronger. And that's essentially just giving you more confidence in your decision-making process, right?
Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I like at the bottom where it talks about, lower levels can generate useful questions that hopefully, like you've talked about, is something that with these different ideas anyway, that needs more research to back it up, but it's what stimulates some conversation anyway to hopefully.
Absolutely. And let's go there. I want to talk about one that brings up, that directly addresses that, apple cider vinegar.
Yeah.
So I know that there are people who are very passionate about providing apple cider vinegar as a supplement to beef cattle. And I think that is a tremendously expensive way to provide energy. The principal nutrient provided in apple cider vinegar is acetic acid. Acetic acid is the number one volatile fatty acid produced by the fermentation of feed ingredients in the rumen of cattle. And so cattle make their own vinegar already. Acetic acid is vinegar, right?
Sure.
And so to me, that the real value in the apple cider vinegar is in the energy that's being provided. But because it's already been fermented, pre-fermented elsewhere, and then provided to the cows, you've pre-processed it. And so when you look at it on a per calorie basis, it's a gosh awful expensive way of providing supplemental calories to a beef cow. But at the same time, one of the places that we haven't studied, right, is that apple cider vinegar contains the mother, and the mother has yeast, it has microbial products that honestly we should figure out if there's not something unique to that component of the apple cider vinegar that brings additional benefits to productivity of beef cattle out independent of just the energy. Because of the evidence that I've seen at this point, or lack thereof, I think about apple cider vinegar in the context of energy, it providing calories to these cows.
Sure.
And like I said, my perspective at this point, and I'm more than happy to be wrong on this, is that it's an awful expensive way to provide calories to a cow at this point.
Sure.
But that there's a need for controlled replicated trials to test the cause and effect, and to identify if there is some other component, like I said, maybe the mother, maybe some of the microbial products that are in it that, yeast, direct fed microbial products, etc., that convey some other benefit.
Yeah. And I don't know much about that. It's one of those things that I've heard a bunch about as well. People talking about, a lot of people really believing in it and stuff as well, from a lot of gut health, different things, talking about reducing, I don't remember the percentages, but you can reduce consumption significantly when you're feeding that as well. And I don't know the details, so I can't speak one way or another on it. But there's some people, it seems like it'd bring a cow back from the dead if you give them enough apple cider vinegar almost and stuff. So.
Well, I've heard, at times I've heard claims of reductions in pink eye. That's not been tested. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen. It's just not been tested, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And again, with the body of evidence that we have currently, to me, it's an energy supplement, and that makes it expensive. Now, there's plenty of energy supplements that are out there, right? I mean, corn is an energy supplement for cattle on pasture, right? That oftentimes I think is undervalued because people are afraid of the starch. They've been sold the idea that starch and corn causes acidosis, and cattle are supposed to eat grass and they're not supposed to eat corn. And, I'm not here, shilling for king corn or the corn lobby or anything, but I also think that when I'm trying to know my numbers and when nutrition are 60% of my cost of production, knowing what are cheap and what are expensive sources of supplemental calories is pretty dang important. And there are a lot of times where corn is a pretty dang cheap supplement on a per calorie basis. And that's maybe sort of a bitter truth to some folks, but it's a reality. And so I'm not afraid to use it,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Were there any other topics top of mind worth discussing in this conversation? And you talked about mineral, creep feed, apple cider vinegar.
Protein. Let's talk about protein.
Sure.
That's another macronutrient, right? So the protein gets equated as what forage quality is determined by a lot of times. Well, I made some really good hay this year. It tested at 11% protein. That was awesome hay. Well, I'll tell you that I have tested a lot of hay in Missouri that'll be 10, 11% protein, but on an energy basis, total digestible nutrients, it'll be below 50%. But yet you see a lot of marketing and you see articles written that will say that, your forage is deficient in protein and that you're better off supplementing protein. I kind of want to just sort that out because there is a geographical divide in protein, that is protein supplementation to beef cattle, that I think is really important for people to understand. And depends on the type of grass that your operation
For sure.
That's your forage base, right?
Right.
And I'm going to break it down broadly rather than by species. Warm season grasses, cool season grasses. So warm season grasses are, go back to New Mexico where I'm from, we're talking about grama species, blue grama, side oats grama, black grama, buffalo grass, tobosa. You go east from there, you get into blue stems, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, switch grass, eastern gamma grass, etc. That's one class, the warm season grasses. Then you get into the cool season grasses, tall fescue, timothy, orchard grass, Kentucky bluegrass, brome, western wheatgrass if you're going out into the Intermountain West. What other big ones am I missing?
You gotta, at least a lot of the big ones here. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So cool season grasses are generally less responsive to protein supplementation when both are fed to beef cows than warm season grasses are. But the context is very important. So a warm season grass, particularly in the wintertime when it's dormant, cured out, you'll see it be 3 to 4% crude protein. Okay. A beef cow has 2 protein requirements. The bugs and the rumen have a protein requirement, and then the cow herself has a protein requirement. Now, the primary source of protein for a beef cow, or any class of beef cattle for that matter, is actually the bugs in the rumen themselves. They only live for 3 to 7 days. They die, they get washed down into the lower gut, and then they're digested in the small intestine and used as a source. We call it microbial cell protein. That's actually the principal source of protein for a ruminant. If your forage is below 7% crude protein, there is not enough protein in the forage to meet the bug's requirement. And what happens when it's below 7, fermentation slows down. And so feed stays in the rumen longer. It gets fermented more slowly to a lesser extent, right? And so what happens then? The factory slows down, the gut stays full longer, feed intake goes down, energy intake goes down. Right. So it's kind of like a snowball, a cascading effect.
Right.
Now, a mature beef cow, if you separate her requirements for protein from the rumen microbes requirements, depending on her stage of production, it's anywhere between about 8.5% and 10.2% crude protein in the diet. But my philosophy and the way I was taught when I was in school, feed the bugs and the rumen, and they will provide for the cow themselves. And so when I'm looking at a feed test, a hay test specifically, and trying to make a decision on whether we need to supplement protein or not, it's it's that 7% threshold. If I'm above 7%, I'm generally not recommending protein. If I'm below 7, I'm going to recommend protein. I don't see a lot of samples that come across my desk in Missouri, hay tests that are below 7% crude protein, but I sure see a lot of them that come below 50% TDN. And so let me put a little rule of thumb context into total digestible nutrients. So that's our best measurement for energy that we can get from a laboratory. There's other forms of energy that are expressed: net energy for maintenance, net energy for gain, net energy for lactation.
Yeah.
I could talk for hours about energy, but
Sure.
let's leave it at TDN. If you have questions, just email me or call me. I'll follow up and give you the full gory, nerdy details on energy metabolism and ruminants. But beef cow, the way that I look at TDN requirements is somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 TDN. 50 to 52 will meet the requirements of a non-lactating but early to mid gestation cow.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not nursing a calf. The fetus is somewhere between 0 and 180-ish days of age. A late gestation cow, so that last trimester before calving, her TDN requirements are like 55 to 57. And then a lactating cow, because she's nursing a calf, her TDN requirements are somewhere 60 to 62% TDN.
Sure.
Okay. And so to me, it is extremely clear that in cool season grasses, based upon the way that we manage them and particularly store them, this is why I rail on about how much I despise current grass hay production practices. They're severely deficient in energy, but not deficient in protein. But it's the absolute opposite if you look at prairie hay from the Flint Hills or elsewhere, or even just, forage that is stockpiled and then grazed in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Out west, it can be severely deficient in protein, but not necessarily deficient in energy. And so then if we can provide range cubes, concentrated crude protein supplements, we can get adequate performance out of these cows on that forage. But the divide is cool season versus warm season. But I sure see a lot of people buying lick tubs in Missouri, lick tubs designed to be marketed, or they're marketed as like a protein supplement. And so, there's a lot of misinformation around even protein from the context of just meeting the nutrient requirements of an animal, not even getting into some of the more salacious claims about too much protein in the diet and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've always felt protein is not our concern this far east. It's an energy issue with our washier, cool season grasses and stuff. And so what's the solution for that? If it sounds like apple cider vinegar is not your recommendation to solve a lack of energy.
Well, it's energy supplementation. It's energy in various forms, whether that's commodities, whether that is, cover crops have tremendous amounts of energy in them, not like corn tremendous, but for forages, they have significant amounts of energy. It's making better hay, honestly. Right. The timing at which you cut grass hay has a significant impact on the energy content in it, right? Because the more cellulose and lignin that's in the feed, the lower the energy content is. Well, how does that translate to the real world? When your baler is running in July, the latter part of July, to cut grass hay, that grass has gone through the vegetative stage, it's gone through the reproductive stage, it's gone completely dormant at that point. Cool season grass, at least.
Yeah.
But yet, I didn't see very many balers running in June in Missouri. I saw a lot of balers running in July. In reality, balers should have run in May. Now, I get a lot of pushback from producers on that, though, because, finding the window of time to get hay swathed, windrowed, raked, and dried down to an acceptable moisture content in the wettest month of the year in Missouri is pretty difficult.
Yeah.
So that feedback is reasonable. But then my next question is, well, why is your operation so dependent on hay in the first place, right? And then that's where people really tune me out because I'm the,
All right.
you know,
Oh yeah.
I'm the guy who's willing to go on the record and saying that, you know, I think a zero hay operation is a very, very achievable goal. And a lot of people disagree with me, particularly in this state. So
yeah. No, that makes sense. And well, this is kind of changing topics, so I'll ask it anyway.
Go
I'm
for it.
curious. This is just something I'm just in observational. I've heard people talk about when you switch from cool season to warm season grass grazing, that it takes 5 days to 10 days for the gut biome of the cow to adjust and things to start changing. I guess I would say I've seen that, but I don't know. You maybe don't. I was just curious if there's anything to that when you switch from grazing cool season grasses to warm season. Okay.
I disagree with that.
Okay.
The reason for that is that we're still talking about principally digesting cellulose and hemicellulose. If you look at the water-soluble carbohydrate content of cool season grasses, it's 8 to 10%. So that would be the sugars, those types of things.
Sure.
You go to warm season grasses and those sugar contents are less than half that.
Okay.
Those would be, there's a lot of misunderstanding about potentially acidosis even among grass cattle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even going back to some people will put bicarb in their mineral supplements and for cattle out on pasture. And I don't see the value in that from my understanding of biology and rumen microbiology in particular, because there's just not a lot of readily fermentable carbohydrates in these forage-based diets, even in really highly digestible, lush, vegetative, at times washy grasses. And so I wouldn't have any concerns about making the switch from warm to cool or cool to warm. What probably ends up happening is that the cows just don't know what it is and they're pretty
and maybe that's what it
timid
is.
Right, because we know that cattle are not necessarily super they're pretty conservative when it comes to switching feed sources, and right? Like
maybe it's more of a social thing than a gut thing. Yeah, like what you're saying, just like a mindset. Yeah, because we definitely, I would say, have seen where when we're going from cool season, we turn them into sorghum in late summer. Like 5 days to 7, right around a week, it seems like they start thriving. And before that, they look thin, like they're not doing very well on it. I don't know, they just don't seem to be performing. Cows, they all don't look very good. And then they just start just mowing it down, taking it in, gaining weight, like looking fantastic right around a week, it seems like each year. And so we've always hesitated to go back and forth. We want to finish it all before the frost so we don't have to worry about, that because we're worried, but maybe we could jump back and forth and they would go back to sorghum the second time just fine.
I have a couple of potential explanations for that. One is let's talk about shrink, right? So, I mean, gut fill in a beef cow can be up to 12% of their body weight. So think about that.
Sure.
1,000-pound cow, and I'm using 1,000-pound cow for easy math because it's late enough in the afternoon that I don't want to have to.
Appreciate that.
I want to keep it simple.
Yes.
Right. So a 1,000-pound cow could have 120 pounds of rumen and GI tract, gastrointestinal tract contents. Right. And so if you get her turned out onto something new and she doesn't eat very much for a couple days, but she continues to poop that out, she could shrink down pretty quickly. Right. And maybe not look like she's doing all that well. On the other hand, if you take her from a forage that is, gone reproductive, it's starting to go dormant, right? It's a lower quality forage that might be 35% moisture feed. You take her and put her out on something lush and vegetative, she might go on to something that could be in excess of 80% moisture or 20% dry matter. And so, a lot of times when people describe washy grass, it's that the dry matter, the moisture content of that grass is super high. Right. It's not that the nutritive value is poor. It's that the moisture content is super high. And so she could be emptying her GI tract out because she's just, got a lot of really wet feed in there and she's just kind of,
Yeah. That all makes
it out
sense.
faster than she can come, she can shovel it in. So
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of maybe reasonable explanations for why something like that might
Yeah.
happen.
No,
And
that
then
makes a lot of sense.
again, if they've never grazed it before, they may not know what it is, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
may take them a minute to kind of
Mm-hmm.
accustom themselves to it. So I
No.
think those are
Yeah.
potential explanations.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah. And yeah, we'll have to maybe try moving them back and forth. If we do get a frost before we finish sorghum and see, they probably will figure it out faster the second time. We'll see. But
Yeah.
that would maybe confirm a little bit. Maybe those theories make sense. Well, is there anything else on this topic before we kind of move into the wrap up here?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like I said, I could talk about protein for a lot longer time than I did, but I
Yeah.
think just
Yeah.
people understanding if
Yeah.
you're cool season grasses, you're more likely in an energy limiting environment, not in a
Right.
protein limiting environment.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know that
I
your
would agree.
money spent on, high protein supplements is as
Mm-hmm.
wise in this environment as it is where protein is severely
Yeah.
limiting. But
Certainly not during the grazing season anyway. When we're in
absolutely.
corn stalks, I mean that's like warm season grass. It's a it's a
Yep.
different thing. Yeah.
No,
But
that is an
yeah.
excellent example. You're exactly
Yeah.
right, Jared. That is a protein limited warm season grass.
Right. Right. Good. Well, I don't know if you have to cancel your share screen here, but we can dive
Yep,
into our wrap up questions then, if you're good with that.
you bet.
Oh, all right. We're going to dive into today's What Are Your Thoughts questions, sponsored by Ambrook. Ambrook is the accounting software I use for all of my businesses. If you're interested in learning more, check out Ambrook. All right. So the last four questions, like I said, I've had you on a couple times. I haven't asked these yet. First one is, what are your thoughts on debt and leverage?
Well, so as an academic, right, I would tell you that first and foremost, I currently do not have any skin in the game, so you should not take me seriously or make any financial decisions based upon my answer whatsoever,
Sure.
right? I strongly desire to have some skin in the game, but I currently do not. So, but I'm not afraid of debt. I'm not afraid of debt. I'm not afraid of leverage. Now, I am afraid of doing that for things that depreciate, right? So, I think that can be a vicious cycle if you're using debt to purchase things that depreciate rapidly. I think that's one big challenge with, a lot of very high iron operations, right? If you've got a lot of haying equipment, you've got a lot of depreciable assets. I spend a lot of time talking about depreciation, and so high interest and high depreciation that's a tough deal to try and get out of. Now, I will say, I mean, interest rates have changed in the last 5 years a bunch, and
Mm-hmm.
interest on cattle for backgrounding operations, interest for feed for those backgrounding operations, that used to be on a cost of gain sheet. That was a tiny expense that was fifth or sixth on the list. Now, interest might be the second highest expense, especially if you're borrowing money to buy cattle in a backgrounding operation. And so I take that pretty dadgum seriously, especially if your equity is pretty low in those cattle that you're buying, if you're trying to maximize your leverage. And so that affects your cost of gains in a backgrounding context. Cow-calf operation, I'm trying to avoid the combination of depreciation and leverage. Backgrounding stocker operations, that is cutting into my profit margin. So,
right. Nope, that
and
makes
unfortunately, our conventional production practices don't pencil out paying for land. So you've got real challenges, trying to go into debt to buy land at this point and start an operation from scratch. So, so that makes it a unique challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you need, specifically with land anyway, you need to have a pretty strong cash flowing operating business to be able to purchase it seems like these days, but makes sense. Next question, then, I guess that's a topic. The next one is, what are your thoughts on land ownership? So good segue.
Well, I am in the camp still where leasing and building an operation off of leased land is probably a more realistic and attainable goal for my family. And so, I certainly would aspire to not have cranky landlords with really sort of unique, ideas on production, right? Like, I think I told you this in
Mm-hmm.
my first podcast, but the number one thing that was on my lease was I cannot use electric fencing on the farm that I had, the last farm I had leased. And that
Crazy.
really kind of
Yeah.
handcuffed my production practices a bit, but that
Mm-hmm.
I tried to negotiate my way out of that one and it did not happen. It was thou shalt not do it. And so,
Wow.
I mean, I aspire to buy land and have an operation on, but I've done the
Yeah.
numbers on a commercial cow-calf operation, and a commercial cow-calf operation, commodity beef focused, is going to provide enough cash flow to cover about $2,000 to $2,500 an acre debt on land.
Okay. Sure.
There's in Missouri,
Yeah.
pasture land right now is selling for 5,000 to 6,000 in the southern part of the state and 8,000 to 9,000 in the northern part of the state. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just not happening at this point.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Good points. Next one then, and this is, it'd be interesting perspective with your combination of having had some of your own operating ranch businesses and working, but what are your thoughts on off ranch investing, or maybe some of the producers that you work with? And maybe you don't get into their financials and stuff, but do you have any thoughts on producers' perspectives on investing off the ranch versus reinvesting all profits back into their business?
Oof, I'm big on diversity. Right. I mean, I even talk about diversifying enterprises within a farm or ranch operation. I
Yeah.
think a 100% commercial cow-calf operation is a really brittle business model because
Sure.
you're exposing yourself to drought risk, you're exposing yourself to a lot of demand for feed 365 days a year when your forage is going to grow for maybe 240 days a year at best.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty risky business. And so I'm a big proponent of even diversifying within the beef cattle sector. A
Sure.
lot of the successful operations that I see, quite honestly, the cash flow is coming from an off-farm business, and that's what's generating
Hmm.
the capital to be able to start the farming operation. And, it's so fascinating for me to see this cash flow. It takes so much cash flow, so much capital to get an ag operation off the ground, but once you get it to catch, it's like ether in an old diesel motor, right? It can
Mm-hmm.
really be a high performing deal, but it just takes a lot. And that's one of the barriers that young producers have to really consider, is that it just takes a lot of capital to get started.
Yeah.
In a I'm going to
Yeah.
buy the land, I'm going to buy the cows kind of a scenario. Now, if you're custom grazing on leased land, totally different context. But no, I think diversifying is really important, and not putting all your eggs in one
Mm-hmm.
basket. Now, on the other hand, I will say that I also have been caught a time or two saying, don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think you could make an argument for don't get distracted.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what I was going to ask you there, is that idea of diversification. I know Ranching for Profit School, I think, and some individuals in that realm kind of talk a lot about diversification being, being a distraction, specifically if the enterprises aren't large enough to really contribute to the bottom line. If they're kind of just smaller things, then for sure they're distractions. But it's obvious to see the benefits of both in that context, especially if they're large enough enterprises that they can actually balance each other out and not just pull a little bit of time away. But no, good points, good thoughts. Last one then is, what are your thoughts around the idea of enough? And that can be whatever your thoughts are on that. If it's specifically cow numbers, dollar, life, business, whatever your thoughts are around the idea of enough.
That is a tough one, because that's something that my wife is always giving me a hard time about, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's almost the antithesis of ambition, right? There are some
Mm,
ambitious people who will let ambition eat themselves from the inside out because nothing is ever enough,
mm-hmm.
right? But then there's
Yeah.
also people who could probably do more, that are super talented, but have decided to, and I don't want to use the term settle, but they've decided this is enough, right? And so That is such a difficult question to answer because it's so it's so unique to every individual, right? Like, I've got a couple young kids right now. I love them to death and I enjoy spending time with them. And, I don't necessarily want to take on anything else right now because I want to spend time with them. Like, that is enough. What I've got right now is enough. But at the same time, there's that itch in the back of my mind that I want to do this, this, and this, and this. And so I don't have an answer for that because I'm both settled and I'm unsettled. I'm ambitious and I've got enough.
Yeah.
That's probably the worst answer you've ever gotten in the history of this podcast. But
no, it was actually very well
it's
answered.
a fascinating one to think about.
It makes a lot of sense to me the way that you put that. That yes, I think that enough is an antithesis to ambition, and that it's good to have the desire to grow. I don't think anybody sitting stagnant is benefiting. I don't think that's really a good thing to just sit and do nothing and twiddle your thumbs the rest of your life because you've accomplished some hypothetical enough. So no, it makes a lot of sense to me. The last question I guess I'll ask you is you mentioned, I think you've got some course or class or something coming up with the or with Missouri there. I'd love to give you the chance to plug that and share anything else that you want to share before we wrap this up, and maybe just share how people can reach out to you or learn more if they want to learn more.
Sure. So on September 2nd and 3rd, we are doing a 2-day short course in Mount Vernon, Missouri, so in the southwest part of the state. And this is myself and 3 other colleagues at the University of Missouri. There's a lot of discourse around cow numbers, cow inventory, rebuilding the herd, increasing numbers. And so we've decided to put together a 2-day short course on heifer development. So everything from nutrition and management, economics, both macro and micro, to genetics, genomics, reproductive physiology, reproductive management, just kind of an intensive short course where we want to help people understand the context of, hey, I'm thinking about keeping some of these really expensive heifers back, right? Because we've classically thought that when heifers get expensive, that will be an incentive for producers to retain them and increase their cow inventory because they're trying to expand their business. But we really haven't seen a whole lot of evidence of that. At least the macroeconomists have not at this point, right? And so, but yet our beef cow inventory is the lowest it's been in 75 years. And so, the program's called Retain with Intention. And so, we did this in May in Columbia, and we had 25 producers there. It was a pretty big hit. We got a lot of really positive feedback. We want to do it again. We want to just help people, rather than in 2014 where everybody kept all their heifers back, prices spiked.
Yeah, right.
Prices fell 18 months later, and then there was a significant depreciation that happened by the time those heifers became cows in their cow herd.
Mm-hmm.
We want to help people be able to maybe do that a little bit more wisely this go round. So
yeah,
it is available on our website at extension.missouri.edu. It's called Retain with Intention. You can search for that. It's an in-person only. It's not an online. I just want to clarify that. It's 2 days. There is a fee associated with it, and I think it's $200 if I remember right. Let me double check that right quick before I before I go off and lie to the listeners here.
I would. That's
I'm not the one leading it. It's one of my colleagues that's leading it. So I am just it's $200. Is $200 per person to attend, and we would love to have some of your listeners join us at the school. We'd love to help people think through that process a little bit more, and the easiest way to reach me is probably either via email. My email is my name backwards, BaileyEric@Missouri.edu. My office phone is 573-884-7873. I don't do a whole lot of social media. I'll occasionally comment on posts on various Facebook groups and stuff like that, but I don't necessarily maintain a dedicated social media channel. I probably should, but I've had enough of trying to keep up with things. to
Yeah.
go back and plug that previous question. So
Right.
I
Right.
don't have like a dedicated social media presence that I have to maintain.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That class sounds fantastic. It sounds like a great podcast discussion to have as well at some point, maybe in the future, because I know a lot of people are thinking about it right now, especially with the last couple of weeks. Sounds like things are dipping. So really, really interesting. Man, I don't think I'll have time to get down there, but would love to. But either way, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your time and engaging in this discussion. I really appreciate it, Eric. Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to the Ranching Returns podcast. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast and share it with a friend who you think might benefit from what we talk about here. Also, if you want to learn more about what we've got going on or want to reach out, you can find me at ranchingreturns.com or send me an email at ranchingreturns@gmail.com. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Ranching Returns podcast.